What is going on, bibliophiles? We're back talking some more books, and we're going to be talking about the probably one of the most well-known books on the Sumerians, written by Samuel Noah Kramer, the renowned Sumerologist. Specifically, we're going to be talking about his book, The Sumerians. And that brings us to the top 10 things I learned from the Sumerians, their history, culture, and character. Number 1. The water table may have prevented archaeologists from reaching virgin soil. And I quote, "The very lowest level of cultural remains in Sumer may therefore now be underwater and may have never been reached by archaeologists, since they would have been misled by the higher water level into believing they had touched virgin soil. If that should prove to be true, Sumer's oldest cultural remains are still buried and untapped, and the date of Sumer's very first settlement may have to be pushed back a millennia or so." That is astonishing, because Sumer is regarded as the cradle of civilization. But as we said in the other video, history begins again at Sumer, it looks like. The second thing I learned, the Sumerians were not a totalitarian theocracy. Even though religion did rule the day and was the organizing principle for their city-states, the king had to buy land from people. He couldn't just seize it. The Sumerians also, women had rights. Women could own property. The Sumerians were a pretty advanced people, and they had education systems. Their kids were being taught. In fact, we have cuneiform writing talking about disobedient kids and how they skipped school that day and how they got beaten by the schoolmaster. Wild stuff. Number 3, similar to the Rosetta Stone, a trilingual cuneiform inscription from Iran was the key to deciphering Sumerian writing. Up until that point, when they first came across it, they thought it was decorative. They didn't believe it was writing. It is, there are different degrees of, there's different styles, I guess I should say, and some really do look decorative. It isn't surprising that they thought that, but other versions of it, it kind of reminds me of like for instance, Chinese ideograms. There is a scholar, I believe his last name is Ball, and he makes a case that they are related, but I haven't really looked into that too much. Number 4, some scholars believe the Sumerian paradise of Dilmun is identified with part of ancient India. That would make sense, and that would be very interesting, because there's even in addition to the Chinese Sumerian connection with writing, there's a similar situation with the Harappan script. There's a connection between that and Sumerian as well. But Dilmun is an excellent candidate for the Sumerian paradise, and that actually fits with Josephus's layout of Eden and the eastern area being where paradise was located. Number 5. Approximately 90% of the cuneiform tablets are economic or administrative. That's fascinating. These people were, they're all business, literally all business. Everything that they're recording is how much grain and how much, they're talking about legal stuff and taxation and all this governmental stuff, all being kept on cuneiform. One thing that should be kept in mind, though, is that when you're comparing scripts, cuneiform is baked clay tablets. Those are lasting forever. Like those will last for thousands and thousands of years. Egyptians writing on papyrus, that'll last. In a dry climate, you'll get lucky, but and the Hindus were writing on cloth. Well, that's a humid monsoon climate, and good luck finding any of that. Number 6, the Sumerian gods needed food and drink, and they could die. So the gods were very anthropomorphic. They did live longer than us, but they were still subject to mortality. Usually it was a battle, you could die by getting killed, but dying of old age isn't something you'll read many times in Sumerian myth. That's not to say that it's not out there, but they usually died from being murdered. The number 7 thing that I learned is that the 7 gods decreed the fates. Now, the 7, the gods that are grouped into 7. Those are those correspond to the seven wandering stars, the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets. And that's interesting that those 7 gods decreed the fates, because all during the history of the Sumerians and all history afterwards, everybody's doing their astrological charts. They're doing their zodiacs, and those 7 gods, you plot, you figure out where they are in the sky. So that the idea that they're decreeing fates, that's the same thing we do today when we look at the horoscope section, where we're seeing what our fate is with the zodiac. So that's an interesting parallel. Number 8. The Sumerian doctors did not invoke gods or demons. I was kind of surprised by that, because I think that's a fine line. In fact, I think I've read some other books on Sumerians that said otherwise, but that the main point of saying that, though, is not that they didn't ever invoke the gods or demons, but that primarily they were very skilled at what they were doing, and they were prescribing medicines and treatments. That was the main gist of that, is that they were a very sophisticated society, and they later on, a lot of cultures did stuff like that, but way back, 2,000-3,000 BC, they weren't doing that in Sumeria. Number 9, the Sumerians believed that mankind was created from clay to serve the gods, very similar to the myths of other cultures, specifically also parallel to the Garden of Eden story, with Adam being created out of clay to work the Garden of Eden. So that parallel really is the only real difference is one is a monotheistic God creating Adam, and the other is the gods creating mankind. But otherwise, the stories overlap considerably, lending veracity to that history. And finally, number 10, Some scholars believe that the Sumerians were the original ancestors of the Hebrew people. And they talk about the connection between, basically they analyze the linguistic and etymological connections between Shem, the ancestor of the Hebrew people, where the word Semitic comes from. It essentially means Asiatic. Like, that's how they divided up the world into the old world continents of the Europeans, the Asians, and the Africans. And so the word for Sumer is connected. Like, sometimes you don't take the last part of the vowels, so you get Shum instead of Schumer, and that connects with Shem because there's no vowels, so it's an interesting connection as well. Anyways, those are the top 10 things I learned from the Sumerians by Samuel Noah Kramer. It is a fascinating book, and it's a good book to read if you want to learn more about, for instance, after the Bible, when mankind builds the Tower of Babel in the land of Shinar. When you're studying the history of the Sumerians, you're learning about that time. So, we don't necessarily think of biblical terms when we're looking at the Sumerians, but we should be thinking of, we should be making those connections. Anyways, thanks for listening, and we will have a place to discuss things in the comments shortly.